The atmosphere was charged with a subtle tension as the sleek Krylaxian shuttle descended onto the Earth's diplomatic landing pad. General Talira, the pride of Krylax's military intellect, stood poised at the forefront, her eyes scanning the horizon of the bustling Earth capital. Beside her, her aide, a young, sharp-eyed lieutenant named Varric, monitored the crowd for any signs of trouble. On the ground, Jason Carter, Earth's chosen diplomat, adjusted his tie with a nervous chuckle, his gaze fixed on the descending shuttle. "Looks like it's going to be an interesting day, huh?" he remarked to his colleague, Michael, a seasoned diplomat with years of experience in interstellar negotiations. Michael nodded, his eyes never leaving the shuttle. "Every time we think we've seen it all, the universe throws us another curveball." As the shuttle's doors hissed open, Talira stepped out, her presence commanding immediate attention. Her uniform was meticulously tailored, the medals on her chest glinting in the sunlight. Jason stepped forward, extending his hand. "Welcome to Earth, General Talira. I'm Jason Carter." Talira's gaze lingered on him, her hand clasping his firmly. "Thank you, Jason. I hope our visit will prove productive for both our people." Jason smiled, guiding her down the platform where Earth's officials awaited. "I'm sure it will. We've prepared a series of meetings and events that should foster understanding and cooperation." Varric followed closely behind, whispering to Talira, "Be wary, General. The humans are known for their cunning." Talira nodded slightly, her eyes sharp. "I am always wary, Lieutenant, but I also know that peace often begins with trust." As they walked, Jason pointed out various landmarks visible from the landing pad. "Over there is the Peace Memorial, built to commemorate the first successful negotiation with an alien species." Talira looked intrigued. "A symbol of peace, then. It is similar to the Krylaxian Harmony Spire. It serves to remind us of what we can achieve together." Jason nodded, pleased. "Exactly. It's a reminder that while we may come from different corners of the galaxy, our aspirations aren't so different." They reached the delegation, and introductions ensued. Michael stepped forward, shaking Talira's hand warmly. "General, we have much to learn from one another. I look forward to our discussions." Talira responded with a polite nod. "As do I. It is my hope that this visit will mark the beginning of a lasting friendship between Krylax and Earth." As the formalities concluded, Jason gestured towards the motorcade waiting nearby. "Shall we head to the conference center? We've arranged a briefing there to outline our agenda for the next few days." Talira agreed, and as they walked towards the vehicles, Jason leaned in slightly. "There's also a small welcome dinner planned for this evening. Nothing too formal, just an opportunity to relax and chat outside of the conference room." "I appreciate that, Jason," Talira said, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "It will be good to see what Earth has to offer." As they settled into the car, Jason turned to Talira. "I hope you'll find Earth to your liking, General. We may surprise you yet." Talira looked out the window, her expression thoughtful. "I have no doubt, Jason. I look forward to discovering more about your world." The motorcade pulled away, leaving the landing pad behind as they headed into the heart of the bustling city, ready to tackle the challenges of diplomacy head-on. Chapter 2. The Diplomatic Dance. The morning was brisk as Jason and Michael led General Talira and Lieutenant Varric into the sprawling conference center, a modern marvel of glass and steel designed to impress even the most traveled diplomat. Inside, a large round table was set up, surrounded by delegates from Earth and Krylax, all eager to delve into the heart of the diplomatic talks. Jason took his place at the table, gesturing for Talira to sit opposite him. "Today we'll be discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges. We believe these are foundational for a strong relationship." Talira nodded, her expression serious as she arranged her notes. "Indeed, trade is the lifeblood of civilization. What specific areas are you considering for this exchange?" Michael chimed in, shuffling his papers. "We're particularly interested in technology sharing, especially in environmental conservation. Your planet's methods for ecological balance are highly advanced compared to ours." Varric looked skeptically across the table. "And what does Earth offer in return?" Jason smiled, anticipating the question. Human creativity is our greatest asset. Our arts, music, and literature can offer Krylax new cultural perspectives. Plus, our technological innovations in robotics are quite advanced. Talira leaned forward, intrigued. Cultural exchange is a delicate matter. It requires understanding and respect. How do you ensure that these exchanges are conducted respectfully? That's a great question, Jason replied. We propose a joint cultural committee to oversee these exchanges, ensuring that both sides are represented fairly and that all content is handled with sensitivity and respect. Talira nodded thoughtfully. A committee is a prudent step. It will help prevent misunderstandings. As the discussion deepened, Jason and Talira navigated complex topics with a growing mutual respect. They debated, disagreed, and slowly started to draft a preliminary agreement that would later be refined by their teams. After several hours, Michael suggested a break. Let's take a moment to refresh. We've prepared some light refreshments outside. As they stepped out of the conference room, the atmosphere lightened. Jason led Talira to a balcony overlooking the city. Sometimes, a little fresh air helps clear the mind. Talira breathed in deeply, looking out over the cityscape. Your planet is beautiful, in a way very different from Krylax. Jason grinned. Wait until you see the countryside. It's even more impressive. Their conversation shifted from formalities to more personal topics. Talira asked about Earth's history, its triumphs and challenges. Jason, in turn, was curious about Krylaxian society, their traditions, and how they maintained peace in a diverse society. Varric, who had been quiet, joined in. Our history is one of unification. Once divided, now we stand as one, through shared purpose and strong leadership. Michael returned with refreshments, handing out drinks. It's important to remember that we're not just negotiating treaties. We're building bridges. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, the group returned inside, feeling more like partners than adversaries. The groundwork laid today would pave the way for a hopeful future, and as they resumed their seats, there was a palpable sense of anticipation for what the next days would bring. Chapter 3: Unlikely Partners. Jason and Michael arrived at the embassy's secure conference room early, their expressions serious. Across from them sat General Talira and Lieutenant Varric, both of whom seemed equally grim. The missing artifact, a Krylaxian cultural relic of immense historical importance, wasn't just a diplomatic disaster waiting to happen. It was a powder keg that could ignite mistrust and undo all the progress the two parties had made so far. Jason broke the tense silence. All right, let's think this through logically. The artifact disappeared during transit from the cultural exchange facility in Geneva. Only a handful of personnel had access to it. Talira folded her arms, her sharp gaze flicking between the two human diplomats. Your internal security measures were clearly insufficient. If the artifact is not recovered soon, there will be consequences. Michael held up his hands, trying to keep the situation from escalating. We understand how serious this is. Our security team is working around the clock. But we also need to consider all possibilities. It's possible the artifact was stolen not by human criminals, but by a third party with an interest in sabotaging our relationship. Varric leaned forward, his voice cold. The Krylaxian delegation would never jeopardize this mission. The fault lies on your side. Jason sighed. No one is blaming the Krylaxians, Lieutenant. What I'm saying is that this could be the work of someone who stands to gain from our failure. If we let this turn into a blame game, we'll never recover the artifact in time. Talira considered his words. What do you propose? Jason hesitated for a moment, then spoke. We should work together personally. A smaller team means less risk of leaks and fewer chances for the thief to slip away unnoticed. If we pool our resources, we might be able to recover the artifact before it becomes a public issue. Talira raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting that we, the four of us, take on this mission ourselves? Michael nodded. We've got leads, but we need to act fast. There's a warehouse near Geneva that was flagged by our intelligence. It's risky, but if we move quickly, We might be able to retrieve the artifact before it's smuggled off-world. Varric shook his head. This is highly irregular. I cannot agree to send the general into the field without proper support. Jason locked eyes with Talira. It's not ideal, but it's the best shot we've got. What do you think, General? Talira considered for a long moment before nodding. Very well. We will do this together. But if anything goes wrong, I hold you personally responsible, Jason Carter. Jason met her gaze, his voice steady. Understood. The team moved quickly. They secured a transport to Geneva, reviewing their plan en route. Michael laid out the intel on the warehouse. The building is owned by a shell company that's tied to a known smuggling ring. The artifact may have been stored there temporarily before being shipped out. Varric tapped the screen of his tablet, showing surveillance footage. There's a back entrance we can use to avoid detection. If we strike at the right moment, we'll have the element of surprise. As they neared the warehouse, Jason looked over at Talira. You sure you're ready for this kind of mission? Talira smirked faintly. I am a Krylaxian general. I faced far greater challenges than sneaking into a human warehouse. Jason chuckled. Good to know. Once on the ground, the team worked in tandem. Michael kept watch outside while Jason, Talira, and Varric approached the back entrance. Inside, they moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing softly. Jason gestured for Talira to follow him into a side room where the artifact was rumored to be stored. Varric covered their flank, keeping an eye out for any guards or security drones. In the dim light, Talira and Jason found a sealed crate that matched the artifact's description. Jason whispered, "This has to be it." Talira carefully examined the markings on the crate, her voice low. These are Krylaxian symbols. It's the artifact. Before they could celebrate, footsteps echoed down the hall. Varric's voice came through their comms. We have company. Jason motioned for Talira to help him move the crate. Together, they slid it into a transport trolley and began to maneuver it back toward the exit. Varric met them at the door, his pulse rifle at the ready. They're coming from the west side. We need to move. The group made a dash for the exit, navigating the maze-like warehouse. They worked in unison, with Varric providing cover and Michael coordinating their extraction from outside. It wasn't smooth, but they managed to get the artifact into their transport vehicle just as the first group of smugglers caught on to their presence. As they sped away, Michael let out a relieved laugh. I can't believe that worked. Jason grinned, turning to Talira. Guess we're not such bad partners after all. Talira allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps not. But this is only the beginning. Now we must ensure the artifact is returned safely. Their mission was a success, and as the city lights of Geneva disappeared behind them, the four began to feel the faint stirrings of trust. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but they had worked together, and that, for now, was enough. Chapter 4, Under the Earth Sky. The team's efforts had paid off. The artifact was now back in safe hands, and both the Earth and Krylax delegations were satisfied that a diplomatic disaster had been averted. For the first time since her arrival, General Talira felt the weight on her shoulders lessen. Jason, sensing her rare moment of relaxation, seized the opportunity. General, he said, leaning against a railing that overlooked the embassy's courtyard. I know you've been working non-stop since you arrived. How about we step away from all this for a while? Talira glanced at him skeptically. What do you mean by step away? I'm hardly in a position to take a vacation. I'm not talking about a vacation, Jason said, flashing his trademark grin. Just a few hours. I'll show you something you won't find in a diplomatic briefing or a cultural exchange program. Something unexpected. Lieutenant Varric, who had been standing nearby, crossed his arms. General, I must insist that. Talira held up a hand to stop him. Lieutenant, I believe I can handle a few hours without a full security detail. Varric hesitated but finally gave a curt nod. If you insist, General, I'll remain here and oversee preparations for tomorrow's meeting. Thank you, Varric, Talira said, her voice firm yet appreciative. She turned to Jason. You seem confident this will be worthwhile, so lead the way. An hour later, they stood at the edge of a sprawling forest just outside the city. The air was crisp, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Talira surveyed the landscape with a mix of curiosity and confusion. "Is this what you wanted to show me? A forest?" Jason chuckled. "It's not just the forest. Follow me." They walked along a narrow trail, the earthy smell of leaves and soil filling the air. Jason kept the pace steady, glancing back occasionally to make sure Talira was keeping up. To his surprise, she wasn't just keeping up. She seemed to be taking in every detail. "This is unlike anything on Krylax," she admitted. "Our environment is far more controlled." "That doesn't surprise me," Jason said. "Earth's nature is raw. It's not always gentle, but it's alive in a way that defies control. You just have to experience it." As the trail opened into a wide clearing, Jason gestured for her to look up. The sky stretched out above them, brilliant with stars. The Milky Way glimmered in a way that no city light could obscure. Talira tilted her head back, her normally stern expression softening. "This," Jason said quietly, "is what I wanted you to see. No diplomatic meetings, no negotiations. Just the universe as it is." Talira stared at the sky for a long moment before speaking. "It's beautiful. I've seen stars from orbit, of course, but this view feels different. Closer. More immediate." Jason nodded. "That's exactly it. It reminds me that no matter how complicated things get, we're all part of something much larger. And sometimes, it takes looking up at the sky to remember that." She turned her gaze to him, her usual sharpness replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful demeanor. "You speak as though you've spent much time contemplating this view." "I have," Jason admitted. "Whenever things get overwhelming, I come out here. It helps me find perspective." They stood in silence for a while, the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of crickets filling the air. Finally, Talira spoke again, her voice softer than before. "Thank you, Jason, for showing me this." "You're welcome," he said, his voice equally quiet. "It's nice to share it with someone who can appreciate it." Talira looked at him, her expression unreadable. "It's rare for me to take moments like this. On Krylax, we're taught that every moment must serve a purpose. But perhaps there's value in simply being present." Jason smiled. "I think so. Sometimes the most important moments aren't the ones where we're doing something, but the ones where we're just here." The conversation drifted into lighter topics after that. Curious questions about each other's worlds, their favorite foods, childhood memories. The serious tone that had dominated their earlier interactions gave way to something more relaxed, even playful. They laughed at small jokes and shared stories, discovering that, beneath their roles as diplomat and general, they were simply two people who had found common ground under a shared sky. By the time they started back along the trail, the stars had shifted slightly, the night deeper and cooler. The once formal barrier between them had softened, replaced by an unspoken understanding. As they walked side by side, their footsteps crunching on the path, Jason glanced over at Talira and realized something had changed. She no longer seemed like the untouchable Krylaxian general. She was Talira, someone he wanted to know better. And for the first time, Talira allowed herself to think the same of him. Chapter 5. The Touch of Understanding. The next day began in quiet tension. The delegation had returned to the embassy late after their impromptu outing, and though the official schedule was packed with discussions, Jason and Talira couldn't entirely shake the sense of camaraderie that had developed under the night sky. Their morning meeting was about interstellar cultural exchange protocols, a dry, technical topic by all accounts. Yet, Jason noticed that Talira's tone was softer, her questions more open-ended. She wasn't simply dictating terms. She was genuinely seeking collaboration. Michael, ever the professional, took the lead on presenting Earth's proposed guidelines. "General Talira, we're suggesting a phased approach to cultural integration. To start, we can exchange curated media, music, films, literature. We believe these initial offerings will help foster mutual understanding." Talira glanced at Jason before answering. And how do you plan to ensure that the material presented is representative of your entire species? Earth is highly diverse. One set of films or books cannot encapsulate the totality of humanity. Jason leaned forward. You're right. That's why we propose starting small, with a wide range of voices and perspectives. The goal isn't to distill humanity into a single narrative. It's to show the variety. And once we establish trust, we can expand that exchange. Varric, who had remained silent for most of the discussion, finally spoke up. And what measures will be in place to prevent cultural misappropriation or misrepresentation? It's one thing to share art, but another to ensure it's respected. Michael nodded. Excellent point. We've considered a joint review committee made up of both Earth and Krylaxian experts. They'll oversee the selection and presentation of cultural material. If either side feels something is inappropriate or misleading, it can be flagged and reevaluated. Talira tapped her fingers on the table, her eyes thoughtful. A review committee could work, provided it's balanced. We won't accept a situation where our culture is examined more critically than yours. Jason smiled. Agreed. Equality and transparency are key. If we can keep those in place, I think this exchange could be one of the most positive outcomes of our partnership. As the discussion wrapped up, Michael gave Jason a brief nod. I think that's enough for this morning. Let's break for lunch and Krylaxian plants that had been brought for the occasion. He noticed Talira standing by a tall, blue-leaf tree, her gaze distant. Jason approached cautiously. General, you look like you have a lot on your mind. She turned to him, her usual guarded expression replaced by something softer. I've been thinking about what we discussed last night, about taking moments to simply be present. Still processing the whole staring at stars thing? Jason teased lightly, though his voice held genuine interest. Talira gave a faint smile. It's more than that. I've spent so much of my life focused on outcomes, on victory, on progress. I never considered that there might be value in simply appreciating what already exists. Jason leaned against the tree beside her. Well, you don't have to give up progress entirely, but maybe it's okay to balance it out. Some moments can be about more than just the end result. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. It's an adjustment, but perhaps it's one worth making. They stood in silence for a while, the breeze rustling the leaves above. Jason could feel the tension that had defined their earlier interactions slowly melting away. It wasn't just about diplomacy or cultural exchange anymore. It was about understanding, not just each other's worlds, but each other as individuals. Finally, Jason broke the silence. I know we're both pretty busy, but if you ever want another chance to just breathe, you know where to find me. Talira tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. I'll keep that in mind, Jason Carter. And as she walked away, Jason couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. They weren't just representatives of their species anymore. They were beginning to become something more, something that neither had expected. Chapter 6. The Heart of the Matter. The evening sky was painted in streaks of gold and violet as the delegation gathered in the embassy's main hall. Tonight's event was less formal than the usual meetings, an opportunity for the Krylaxian and Earth representatives to mingle over food, music, and quiet conversation. Jason stood by the refreshment table, nursing a glass of wine and observing the room's subtle shifts in tone. Over the past several days, the walls of formality had begun to crack, revealing the personalities beneath. Yet, despite the progress they'd made, he knew there were still unspoken barriers, especially between him and Talira. He spotted her near a tall window, silhouetted against the fading sunlight. She seemed lost in thought, her posture rigid yet somehow tired. Jason approached her carefully, his voice low enough not to startle her. It's a beautiful view, isn't it? Talira turned slightly, her sharp features softened by the dim light. It is. The sunsets here are so different from those on Krylax. How so? He asked, genuinely curious. Krylax has twin suns. The horizon is bathed in two overlapping light streams. Golden from one sun, pale blue from the other. It's brighter, harsher, but still comforting in its consistency. Talira explained, her tone thoughtful. Jason nodded. Sounds stunning. Maybe one day I'll see it for myself. She regarded him for a moment before replying. Perhaps you will, if our partnership continues to develop. There it was, partnership. A safe word that allowed them to dance around the real subject at hand. Jason decided to push just a little further. Talira, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really agree to come here? Jason kept his gaze steady. I mean, I know the official reasons, diplomacy, fostering ties, all that, but you strike me as someone who doesn't do anything without a deeper reason. She considered his question, her eyes searching his. Finally, she spoke. Because I believe that we cannot afford to remain isolated. Our civilizations have grown, advanced, and flourished, but we've also become stagnant in certain ways. Meeting others, learning from them, challenges us. It forces us to reevaluate what we believe and how we approach the future. Jason smiled faintly. You sound like me. That's why I joined the diplomatic corps, to challenge the old ways of thinking, to bridge gaps instead of building walls. Then it seems we are aligned in more ways than one, Talira said quietly. There was a brief silence before Jason leaned against the windowsill, looking out at the darkening sky. It's funny, isn't it? How you can meet someone from an entirely different world, a different species, and still find yourself having these moments of connection. Talira studied him. I admit, I did not expect this. I thought my time here would be spent deciphering your politics, countering your moves, and ensuring that Krylax emerged in a position of strength. I didn't think I'd meet someone who could change how I see things. Jason chuckled. You mean someone who could keep up with you? Her lips curved slightly. Perhaps. The sound of faint music drifted through the air as a small string ensemble began to play. Jason straightened and extended a hand. Care to join me for a dance? Talira raised an eyebrow. A dance? Just one, Jason said. No politics, no negotiations. Just two people enjoying the moment. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Very well, just one. They moved to the center of the room where a few other couples had already begun to dance. Jason held her hand gently, his other hand resting lightly on her waist. She was taller than most human women, and there was an undeniable strength in her presence. But her steps were surprisingly graceful. They danced without speaking, the music filling the spaces between them. After a few minutes, Jason leaned closer, his voice just above a whisper. You're a good dancer. Talira tilted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. I've had training, but I admit this is different. There's an intimacy to it that's not often present in Krylaxian forms of dance. Jason smiled. Sometimes, the simplest things can make the biggest impact. The song ended and they parted slowly. Talira inclined her head. Thank you, Jason. That was unexpectedly pleasant. Glad you enjoyed it, Jason said, his tone light but his smile genuine. As they stepped away from the dance floor, the room seemed a little warmer, a little brighter. While they had come from different worlds, their connection was growing stronger, piece by piece. Chapter 7: The Strategy of Peace. The morning after the dance, Jason sat in his office, poring over stacks of reports and diplomatic correspondence. The cultural exchange programs, security cooperation pacts, and tentative trade agreements were all taking shape. Yet as he read through the documents, he couldn't help but think about Talira. The steps they'd taken on the dance floor felt like more than just a passing moment. They had laid a foundation for something greater, something more lasting. His thoughts were interrupted by Michael's voice at the door. Jason, you've got a visitor. Looking up, he saw Talira standing behind Michael, her posture composed as always but with a subtle change in her expression. Was it curiosity? A hint of openness? He wasn't quite sure. He set the papers aside and rose to greet her. Good morning, General. I wasn't expecting you. Talira stepped into the office, her voice steady. I wanted to discuss the next steps for our cultural initiative. If we're to ensure its success, we need a solid strategy that both our governments can support. Michael excused himself, leaving them alone. Jason gestured for Talira to sit, and she chose the chair directly across from him. It was a small act, but it spoke volumes. No barriers, no subordinates standing by. Just the two of them discussing their shared goals. Jason leaned back slightly. I agree. We've made progress, but we still have to address how we'll manage long-term oversight and funding. I'm open to suggestions. Talira's hands rested on her knees, her fingers lightly tapping as she spoke. From Krylax's perspective, it's critical that we have equal representation in decision-making. While we trust your intentions, this partnership must reflect both our strengths. Jason nodded. That makes sense. What if we create a joint advisory board? Half Earth representatives, half Krylaxian. They'd oversee the program, propose new initiatives, and ensure that everything stays transparent. She considered the idea. That could work, provided the board has clearly defined authority. It must be able to veto proposals that don't align with our agreed-upon values. Agreed, Jason said. We can draft the framework for the board's responsibilities together, and once it's ready, present it to our respective governments. As they continued to hammer out the details, their conversation drifted into more personal reflections. Jason mentioned some of the cultural hurdles he'd faced in the early days of interstellar diplomacy, and Talira shared a story about her first command, a mission that had nearly gone sideways due to a critical misunderstanding between Krylaxian clans. Their shared experiences, though different in nature, revealed a common thread: the challenges of navigating relationships while maintaining authority and trust. After an hour, they had sketched a solid outline for the advisory board. Jason leaned back, a satisfied smile on his face. I think we've got the makings of something that could really work. Talira's lips curved slightly. I believe so. You have a way of simplifying complex issues without undermining their importance. It's admirable. Jason chuckled. Coming from you, that's high praise. She met his gaze, her expression softening. I meant it. For a moment, the room grew quiet. The weight of their shared progress, and perhaps something more, settled over them. Jason broke the silence, his tone light but sincere. It's been a while since I've worked with someone who can challenge me and keep me on my toes. Talira tilted her head. And it's been a while since I've worked with someone who surprises me. The admission caught Jason off guard. He smiled, letting the moment linger. I'll take that as a compliment. She rose from her seat, and he stood as well. We'll finalize this proposal soon. For now, I need to relay our progress to my delegation. Jason walked her to the door, pausing before she left. Talira, thanks for trusting me with this. I think we're onto something good. She nodded, her voice steady but warmer than usual. So do I, Jason. As she stepped out into the hallway, Jason watched her go, the weight of their growing partnership sinking in. They weren't just making deals, they were building something that could truly last, something that neither had quite anticipated. Chapter 8. A New Dawn. The grand hall was filled with the soft murmur of conversation, diplomats and dignitaries from both Earth and Krylax mingling under the vaulted ceilings. A projection of a rotating Earth Krylax emblem shone on the far wall, symbolizing the collaborative efforts that had taken shape over the past weeks. Jason adjusted his tie, glancing around the room. Everything was in place, now it was just a matter of sealing the deal. At the far end of the hall, Talira entered, her movements as poised as ever. But this time, Jason noticed a faint shift in her demeanor. She carried herself with the same authority, yet there was a subtle ease in her step, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Jason made his way toward her, intercepting her just before she reached the main stage. You ready for this, General? He asked, his tone light. She turned to him, her expression unreadable at first. Then a faint smile appeared. I believe so. And you, Jason? Do you think we've done enough? Jason's grin widened. I think we've done something no one else thought possible. And it's because we worked together. Talira inclined her head slightly, a rare moment of acknowledgement. It's been an enlightening experience, Jason. One that I hadn't anticipated. Their exchange was interrupted as Michael approached, clipboard in hand. Jason, General Talira, it's time to begin. The three of them moved toward the stage, the crowd quieting as they took their places. Jason glanced out over the audience. A mix of human and Krylaxian faces, all waiting to hear the next step in their collaboration. For a moment, he hesitated. Then Talira spoke softly beside him, her voice carrying a quiet assurance. Go ahead, Jason. This is what you've worked for. Her words steadied him. He stepped forward, addressing the assembly. Thank you all for being here. Over the past several weeks, we've faced challenges, disagreements, and moments of doubt. But we've also found common ground. We've learned that our differences don't have to divide us. They can strengthen us. And today we take a step forward, together. As Jason continued, he outlined the final agreement they had reached. A framework for cultural exchange, economic collaboration, and scientific cooperation that would be overseen by the Joint Advisory Board. He spoke about the shared goals, the shared trust, and the shared future that this partnership represented. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Talira stepped forward next, her commanding voice cutting through the applause. She spoke not only as a general but as someone who had come to understand the value of Earth's perspectives. She highlighted the dedication of both delegations, the willingness to listen and learn, and the strength that came from working as equals. Her words carried weight, and when she concluded, there was a sense of collective agreement in the room. For the first time, it felt as though the two worlds truly understood one another. As the applause faded, Jason and Talira exchanged a glance. It was subtle, but it carried the unspoken acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together. This wasn't just a diplomatic victory, it was a personal one as well. Later, as the evening transitioned into a celebratory reception, Jason found Talira standing by one of the large windows overlooking the city. The lights twinkled below, a stark contrast to the dark expanse of space that had once separated their worlds. You know, Jason said as he approached, I think we make a pretty good team. Talira turned to him, her expression softening. I believe you may be right. He leaned against the windowsill beside her. So what happens next? She looked out at the city lights, her gaze thoughtful. Next, we ensure that what we've built doesn't fade. We follow through on our promises. And we continue to learn from each other. Jason nodded. I like the sound of that. They stood there in comfortable silence, the distant hum of the reception fading into the background. It wasn't the end, just the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together.